Hello, welcome back to the reading up to MILELE. We're on chapter 4. Um, we left chapter 3 in the dome, which is a special container or room inside the interrogation and debriefing chamber, which is inside the main military building, where Colonel Davenport, the top military commander on the island, was interrogating Michael Shanxi, the man that was discovered at the water's edge. We also learned a little bit more about Gideon, Lieutenant Gideon Mandela, part of one of the military personnel on the island, as well as we were introduced to Vohan Batten. He is one to pay attention to, and he is also one of the agri-team workers and assistant. Also, Dr. Janice Misra, who's head of the Laboratory of Science Research. We were also introduced to lockdowns. Sometimes there were breaches of security on the island, and so lockdowns were necessary until things were taken into control. And we learned that refugees often try to get to the island because, of course, Idintu is like this paradise. But not everyone, of course, as we remember, can live there without the suit. And more insight into Nathan and Hope's relationship as twin siblings, and Hope's special genetics that has a lot of people wanting to use her pretty much as a guinea pig. Okay, so let's get into the next chapter. Chapter 4 is quite short. It's a different place. So we will read chapters 4 and 5. Let's go. Chapter 4, Jennies, a place outside of time. The sovereign prince turned to the sovereign emperor, his father. He said, "Michael has reached Eden too. Gideon will not stray from his purpose. Boa and Ruth will be steadfast. Peter will keep his charge. Nathan will hold fast until he meets the one who will stand with him. The island kingdom will serve its purpose, but the one who must endure to the end will be severely tested. Will she stand?" The emperor smiled. "It is my will that she stands. Everything will be done toward that purpose. She does not know that she was chosen from childhood, from the womb." The emperor lay a strong hand on his son's shoulder, his only son, before turning away. The emperor walked with measured steps, his robe billowing behind his majestic being across the expanse of time and universe, to an elevated place with a majestic throne. He sat on the throne, a throne unlike any other. It was a throne fit for one who could not be contained in one place. Beside the throne was another throne. This throne was also majestic but different. It was for the prince's physical form. The prince stood below, looking up at his father. The prince's beauty was glorious and glowed from within. It never failed to fill his father with joy and admiration. And for such a son, only a particular bride would do. The bride would rule with his son in the sky kingdom, which was still being prepared. Soon it would be completed. His son continued looking up with complete trust. His eyes were warm and full of the sun. Chapter 5. We're back to Eden 2. He had entered the Nutrition and Wellness Center just before the evening meal, startling her with his sudden appearance. "Agios, Hope breathed. You scared me. Despite her words, soothing warmth flowed around her, into her. A faint fragrance, like spring, fully awakened her. She'd been dozing, but should have known he would be present. She'd sensed him, even in her sleep. Smiling, he stood before her desk, dressed in his usual simple white shirt and tan pants. His wardrobe held a little imagination, and yet she couldn't imagine it any other way. For that matter, Hope remained ignorant of where he lived, what he ate, where he slept. When he'd rescued her from the waters of the Atlantic, he had housed her in a simply built cottage. There'd been crude wooden furniture, a bed, table, 2 chairs. She remembered a few shelves with kitchenware of clay, cast iron pots, and wooden utensils. There'd been an outdoor fire for cooking and pottery jars of water in the cottage and larger ones outside. A primitive outhouse had been the only other building. Hope had gone back many times to the place where she was sure the cottage had been, but had never found it. Even her 3 changes of clothing, which had been white, seamless, ankle-length tunics that Agios had supplied, had somehow been misplaced. Whenever she asked Agios about the cottage, all he would say was it was no longer needed and was no longer there. Every time she insisted on digging for more answers, his look would silence her. It was his way. Now he stood before her with strength and purpose radiating from him. Keiko will come. Remember, he is not what he seems. He now rules over the Council of Nations. Agios's tone held its usual calmness, but with added gravity. Hope straightened in her seat. So you've told me before, Agios, and that the Council of Nations, once known as the World Council, had been originally established by the Welsh geese. She looked at him intently, trying to understand past his words. Though she did not fully understand the Welsh geese, she knew it to be a hidden world order, whose core beliefs were in direct contradiction to Prince Adani's teachings. And remember, you belong to another. Hope shifted impatiently. That you've also told me, and I still don't know what you mean. Be patient, dear one. In time you will know and remember. He turned to leave. She stood to her feet. Agios. He turned back halfway. What about Prince Adani? Is it true he could have been envoy of the world, like Keiko Baines is now, after the initial toxin crisis? Agios faced her fully. Deep remorse lined his face. Sovereign Prince has not given up on the world. He is the true friend of humanity. Stepping out from behind her desk, Hope pressed for more. But does he care? He has been so silent. Agios seemed to ponder for a moment, then his gaze pierced her. Have you forgotten how for 3 years he gave up everything to work among a world in crisis? Years before the mist, many rejected his plans to save humanity. Have you taken no thought of his people still under the mist, your fellow comrades working even now to help the world? Yes, and they're still loyal to him. So why does he not provide escape for them? She stubbornly persisted, waving her hand dramatically. To that sky kingdom of his, or even to Jennies, the realm of the sovereigns. Agios remained silent, watching her with a mixture of sadness and pain. Guilt gnawed, but hope couldn't seem to stop. And speaking of the Sky Kingdom, is it still there? Does it still exist? Why can we not go there now? Why wouldn't he answer her? Why was he always so vague? When you ask with the right heart, the right intent, the answer will be made clear. Then he walked away, closing the door firmly behind him. What? Hope thought. How could he have known? Does Agios also read minds? New scene. Hope ran her hands over the open pages of a thick book that lay before her on the picnic table where she sat. The Truth Tome. It seemed to breathe a life of its own, filled with truths that spoke to the past, present, and future. It was the Book of the Sovereigns. It was late afternoon, and not many people were taking advantage of the park-like setting of strategically spaced picnic tables on the west side of the hub. There were three other areas around the hub, the only places on the island with real lawns. A tennis court was at the second site and a basketball court at the third. But it was from this site that the waterfall could be seen more clearly. Its powerful tumble down the mountain created sprays of cooled mist that floated up from a foamy pool beneath, a pool that perpetually emptied through crevices in the rocks underneath. Now remember, this is the only mountain on the island. Hope, you can't deny the prince's work among the countries, especially those struggling to survive, said Boa, who was sitting across the table from Hope. Humanity was meant to rule this world, which, as you know, was once very much a paradise. But that right was given up to the Weltgeist after we exchanged the key from the sovereigns for the vial from the Weltgeist. The Weltgeist came promising untold knowledge that the contents of the vial would make us superhuman. But instead, we ended up with the toxin that slowly kills us, not to mention the terrible effect it has on nature. Hope had taken her leftover debate with Agios to her two closest friends. Boa had been defending the latter's argument for the past 15 minutes, with Ruth as his prime backup. It wasn't exactly how they should have been spending their required 1 day per week of rest and restoration. But Prince Adani either evoked fierce devotion or fierce debate. Anything in the middle seemed useless. It wasn't that Hope wanted to stoke contentious flames, but since her last brief encounter with Agios, something had been lit within her. But why not just rescue the world? As part of the sovereigns and with all that's at his disposal, could he not? Her thoughts were restless. Who completely understood the key or the vial? She knew that the former that's the key, was an ancient stone tablet giving authority of rule over the earth, and had been granted by the sovereigns, and that the latter, the vial, was an unknown substance from the Weltgeist that had been released into the atmosphere. Ruth, who sat on Hope's side of the table, held up a silencing hand, halting Boa's response. Hope Kala Kanisa, what are you really asking? Are you questioning Prince Adani and his father's benevolence to Earth, or are you painting them as evil or ill-intentioned? Ruth, Hope started in indignant protest. No, think about it. We've been down this road before. I guess I'm wondering what you're really after. After all, the prince did rescue the world. As you know, the law of the universe required the death of someone untainted by the toxin to break the abominable agreement that humans had entered with the Weltgeist. The prince committed to what was needed to save humanity and to retrieve the key. Did you forget his horrific death? Hope met Ruth's anxious gaze for a moment, then looked at Boa. Concern registered there too. Clasping his hands on the table, Boa said, "She's right, Hope. You, as well as I, know most of the world have rejected the prince's plan for humanity's survival and thriving. Many don't believe he's really the son of the sovereign emperor. Others don't believe he should be named among the sovereigns. The toxin contained every evil thing that was ever birthed, past, present, future, and he allowed it to invade his body." Boa paused. His eyes had reddened. He blinked rapidly, then he said in a voice choked with emotion, "We can't even understand or imagine what that all means or what it did to him." Hope remained silent. Even if she hadn't, she knew Boa as a child had witnessed the death of Prince Adani. At that time, it had been streamed online for all the world as a warning of what standing against the Welshgeese could mean. Strangely, a few years later, no evidence of the video could be found, as if it had never happened. After running a hand across his eyes and clearing his throat, more in control of his emotions, Boa pinned Hope with an earnest look. "He died doing that, but because he's different from us and the son of sovereign emperor, he was brought back to life. Surely not something the Welshgeese had expected. Not only that, but he was able to take back the key and, most importantly, allow the use of his blood to create an antidote to the toxin. The effects of the toxin are still with us, but if people refuse his antidote, it's their choice. They can't be forced." "We can't have it both ways," Ruth added gently but firmly. "It's either his way or our way." But but it says here in the truth tome to always help those in need." Hope smoothed the pages again to emphasize her point. "People don't accept the antidote because it only works a certain way. What about those people who just don't?" "Who don't want to accept that way?" Boa finished for her. "Yet it's the only way to get what they want so much. Eat into DNA. But without the antidote, it's impossible to develop the DNA. You know this, Hope. The antidote is only activated once a true vow of loyalty is pledged to Prince Adani, which is also loyalty to the sovereign emperor. The antidote allows the very essence of the sovereigns to indwell us, which will only work if the pledge is sincere. It's hard to fathom. And of course, those who still hold to the intent of the Welshgeese will refuse. If that's the case, then they will continue to be under the effects of the toxin even when they could be actually free of it." "And so far," Ruth said, "he's kept his end of the bargain. With their essence, we no longer have to be controlled by the toxin," she reminded gently. "The sickness, the hate, rage, greed, everything bad. Isn't that great? And the more we follow Agios's counsel, the more we're empowered by their essence. We're able to do better for ourselves and do what we can to help the rest of the world. Hope, how can you paint him as a villain? I'm not. And I know and believe what you've both said. I just feel more could be done, especially now with the mist. I feel badly for everyone, whether they're loyals or not." Boa leaned back, arms crossed. "Again, Hope, it was Prince Adani, through the loyals, who warned against the last attempt of the Welshgeese to compete with the prince by creating their own space kingdom. Every attempt failed, leaving all that debris in outer space. The prince warned that it would cause disaster on Earth, but those in power refused to listen, and no one is willing to take the blame or admit the possible connection to the asteroid. Well, then, Hope began, Sovereign Emperor should have made us listen. Listen? Really? And be accused of holding the world hostage, Boa said. It was laid out for us, and we were given the choice. The Council of Nations made their decision and, again, went along with the Welsh geese. The sovereigns have the power to overturn it since they built the universe and brought all life into being, but they stayed true to the agreement settled with our world long ago, humanity's freedom of choice. Boa looked disgusted, and Hope knew she was pushing too far. This isn't like you, Hope, Ruth said, looking worried and puzzled at the same time. What's gotten into you? Hope slowly closed the truth tome. She ran her fingers across her forehead, over her eyes. I I don't know. I'm sorry. It's just ah, sweetie, Ruth began, taking hold of Hope's hand that lay on top of the truth tome. I know at times it's harder for you than the rest of us. You've been here longer, have more demands on your person. You told me once that you meant Prince Adani long ago. What did you think of him then? Ruth was still holding her hand, and Boa looked sympathetic, making her feel even worse. I I know that I was 18 and that it had been years after he had disappeared from this world, but it's one of the things I can't seem to remember since Agios rescued me. Hope paused, realizing something forgotten was being stirred. Pressure started in her head. She stifled the memory. The pressure eased. But from what I learned about him, I felt he was good and genuinely caring, with the power to do so much good. I judged that about him and pledged loyalty to him. She bowed her head. I I guess I just expected more. Boa leaned forward. And yet, how can we force people to do what they don't want to do? The sovereign's wish was to design humanity similar to themselves, to share in their joy of the worlds, the universe, and other good things, stuff still a mystery to us. I suppose, Hope conceded, feeling wretched. She looked down at her and Ruth's entwined hands, then at Ruth. Ruth smiled wistfully. I've never seen Prince Adani. I never learned about him as a child like you, Hope. I knew much about him like Boa. Her eyes welled with tears. The toxin had really taken a toll on my body and my mind. Then someone told me about the prince's antidote and how I could connect with him. Like I said, I didn't see him, but I felt drawn to his essence and accepted his immunity. My allegiance has belonged to him ever since. Mine too, Boa added, and he reached across the table to briefly squeeze their entwined hands. He grinned. And if I ever start forgetting, Agios is sure to show up and remind me. Ruth brushed a wet trail from her cheek. Isn't it interesting how he always seems to be there at just the right moment, she said. Whenever you need him, Boa added. Yeah, Hope agreed, finally relenting. Almost like someone you've always known or someone he reminds you of that you can't put your finger on it. New scene. A few hours later, Hope sat with the sunset behind her on the slope of the high point, the top of the mountain where she believed Agios had housed her. It wasn't a very high mountain, more like a very big hill, mostly rounded with areas of level ground on top. Vegetation was sparse with tufts of wild grass and sporadic rocky areas. It wasn't the most beautiful place, but it was peaceful, and all of Eden too could be seen from its peak. It was also her favorite place to be at the end of an assigned day off. the perfect place to refocus after her challenging conversation with Boa and Ruth. The truth tome was still with her, clenched in her hands. Her hair, set free, fell midway down her back, rustling in the breeze. Freedom. As much as one could be free with helicopter and foot patrol ever on duty. Much credit to the military security on foot. They tried not to disturb her reverie and seemed to painstakingly alter their course to stay out of her way. She knew part of it was in deference to her status on the island. Her hold loosened on the truth tome, and she settled in as it settled into her lap. She inhaled the clean, warm air. The rumble of the cascading waterfall further around the mountain and on her left hushed her churning thoughts. Its source was a mystery, the waterfall. The general mist surrounding the island was ominous and unrelenting. The mist patch at a distance on her right was even more forbidding, with its voluminous billows of dark gray cloud continuously churning. Scientists assured the world that the mist was slowly dissipating, losing its density. Even so, it was a small comfort to those who had been living under it for the past 5 years. The only blessing was that the earth inexplicably remained at a moderately warm temperature. Except for in Israel, winters had ceased. It was as if the mist was a living thing, continuously infusing warmth into the atmosphere, except for the mist patch. There it was dry and cool. Here on the mountain, with the normal evening sky above and the green fields of crop below and the ocean in the distance, though all was surrounded by the mist, Hope experienced a sense of well-being she could find nowhere else on the island, that is, except in Agios's presence. But now it wasn't Agios's presence she was sensing. She turned to look back. Her heart sank. Keiko Bays, and he was alone. No, he wasn't alone. Now, just cresting the mountain was that dreadful looking man in the pea suit. How could anyone ever get used to such an ominous, towering figure? It was said he was all the bodyguard Keiko needed, that he could snap a man in half with his bare hands. Hope couldn't remember ever hearing to say in conversation with anyone. She actually wondered if he had a speech impediment. However, it was the man who'd left his usual suit jacket and tie behind, wearing his white dress shirt rolled up at the sleeves and black suit pants, who now held her attention. Why was he here? Oh, yes, of course. She'd forgotten their appointment. On purpose. She started to stand, but he stayed her with an outstretched hand. No, no, please don't be disturbed. I'll join you. His voice was deep and well modulated, but with an insistent tone that spoke of unchallenged authority. He eased down beside her at a respectful distance on a patch of grass. After taking a moment to survey their surroundings, he rubbed his hands together as if they were cold. He was frowning. The place that seemed to calm her the place that calmed her seemed to make him uncomfortable. Envoy Bays, to what do I owe the honor? As thrilling as it should have been to be sought out by such a powerful man, Hope couldn't quite bask in the knowledge. It wasn't just his outright opposition to Prince Adani. His very presence stirred conflicting emotions within her that she couldn't really understand. He was looking at her, now smiling. Keiko, please, as I've invited you to do before. His ice blue eyes darkened. And I'm sure you're well aware of our missed appointment. She looked away, feeling uneasy. He exuded a strange, seducing aura that was subtly unnerving. It's uncomfortable with everyone else addressing you as Mr. Envoy or Envoy Bays. She ignored his reference to their scheduled meeting. She glanced back at the bodyguard to say, he was standing rigidly looking out at the water with the sunset reflecting off the clear facial shield of his bodysuit. Her gaze then returned to the man by her side. Keiko was still looking at her. True, and yet I have given you permission. He pointed at the truth tome on her lap. I see you're still entrenched in the teachings of the Sky Kingdom. Yes. Hope's hands tightened on the book, noticing that he hadn't returned to the topic of their missed appointment. Good that he hadn't. Why should she have his presence forced on her at practically every visit on the island? You still persist on filling your head with the deceptions. His face was perfectly composed, but his words and piercing eyes created a dagger-like tension between them. Hope gave her head a slight shake, then took a deep, cleansing breath. A group of gulls had just emerged from the mist into the island's clear airspace. They circled curiously, calling noisily at each other before continuing their flight. Soon they were lost to sight. It's interesting how the animals seem unaffected by the mist, Hope stated. Keiko touched the hand holding the truth tome. Her breathing paused. Please don't change the subject, Hope Kanisa. He removed his hand. He'd never touched her before. Keiko, not everyone thinks the teaching of the Sky Kingdom is deceptive. Surely even you can see its value, the benefits, wisdom, and knowledge we have no other way of achieving. He countered her swiftly. Wisdom and knowledge as old as time. You don't actually believe they're original to the Sky Kingdom, do you? Truth mixed with lies. Come on, you must see it. See it? There are many proofs of its authenticity. Arguing with Boa and Ruth was one thing, but in the face of this type of opposition, Hope knew where her loyalty lay. Over the years, it's been challenged, chewed up, examined with a fine-tooth comb, to no avail. It stood up to the test. In fact, it said that the truth tome was written by the sovereigns. A strange noise from Tusabe momentarily distracted them. Keiko frowned. Who was there to see? How can we know for certain who they of the sovereigns are and how they came by their message, their power? The sovereign emperor is not who you think he is. We may not know much of the emperor, but we know Prince Adani, she said. He'd been here, worked among us, helped us. A thought came to her. She braced for his reaction. And how can we know who you are, how you came by your seat of power? Some even claim that you are the true son of sovereign emperor. He looked disturbed for a moment, but quickly recovered. His smile was charming, and it affected her as it would any woman. Whether I'm the son is not the question. It's who I will become that's important. He shrugged. My life is an open book. She couldn't help it. A book written by whom? A stillness cloaked Keiko, and a foreboding, grave expression replaced the earlier smile. You have much to learn, Hope, but I'm a willing teacher. The smile returned, but his eyes remained unchanged, icy yet compelling. He slowly stood to his feet. She looked up at him, relief already setting in. Will you allow me to escort you back to the compound? He seemed genuine, friendly, now that his eyes had softened. The sunset behind made him a silhouette, imposing, magnificent. Tasabe was staring at her. She could feel it. Chills. She looked down. Thank you. No. I'll stay a bit longer. Very well, then. I know where to find you next time. His gaze was frank, intense, consuming, possessive. Hope's breath caught in her throat. He turned to leave. She breathed. New scene. Hope waited a good half hour after the unexpected company had left before making her way back down the mountain. A red-orange sunset now sat behind her. As usual, she pretended not to see the guard trailing her. No matter her protest about personal security, Governor Peter wouldn't rescind his order. It felt invasive, but at times comforting. At the bottom of the mountain, she followed a narrow trail that ran through the middle of the uncultivated land located between Agri 6 and the outskirts of the Mist Patch. Ground cover vegetation was sparse along the much used trail, but the edges were bordered by low, dense bushes that had sprung up all over the island. A few minutes later, she reached her travel cart. Less than 10 minutes later, sentries at the compound gates nodded respectfully as she drove through, probably the last civilian to enter the safety of the compound walls. The walled compound was a constant reminder of how difficult it had been for her to embrace the structured community. When she and Agios had been alone on the island those 3 months, she had roamed the entire island with him. He had clothed her, warmed her, and fed her. He had guided her, taught her more about the world, the truth tome, Jennies, and the sky kingdom than she could fully grasp. And yet she questioned. How ungrateful. If Agios knew, his heart would be broken. Hope stilled her troubled thoughts as she entered the extensive front lobby of the Hub. Further down from the lobby, two wide corridors were created from a row of offices that ran down the center of the building. The outer walls of both corridors had multiple doors that led to a myriad of other rooms, including more offices, as well as clinics, cafeterias, utility rooms, and the four two-story dorm attachments visible from outside. The enormous dimensions of the building reminded Hope of a section of airport terminal, though not as impersonal. She headed to the left corridor, nodding and smiling repeatedly at the brief greetings from those she encountered. As she paused in front of the door leading to the women's dorm, a sudden awareness washed over her. Certainly, Agios already knew about her questioning. Shame filled her. It was said that in every person with Eden 2 DNA acquired through the antidote from Prince Adani's blood was the essence of the sovereigns. The antidote's work against the toxin allowed for their essence to infuse into the inner beings of humans, bringing new life and healing. Agios was that very essence, so that even when he was not seen, as in the rest of the world under the mist, he could still be heard and felt. Unfathomable, unfathomable as it seemed, Agios was outside of her and Agios was inside of her. So why was she also drawn to Keiko Baines, who embraced the Vouchnies? He was brilliant, yes, very handsome and very powerful. Much of his power as CEO of the world's largest investment firm had come from his mother. Her family had created that legacy for their precious grandson. No one knew his biological father. It was said the man who raised him was his adoptive father. Also, a foremost self proclaimed prophet and leader of a worldwide religion, Mendax Nubian, had declared to the world, even before the mist, that Keiko Bays was one to watch, one destined to rule the world. At that time, people had scoffed at the announcement as one of sensationalism, thinking that Mendex was only trying to grab the attention of the world. Yet, Mendex's beliefs also coincided with that of the Welsh geese, that humanity's ultimate destiny was tied up in nature and the universe, and in becoming superhumans and charting their own course. The world no longer scoffed. But was it Keiko Bays who would rule, or was it the Welshgeese? Therein lay her discomfort. That takes us to the end of chapter 5. I hope you will join me again for chapter 6. Take care.